Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our VIA Pioneer Speaker Series. My name is Ryan Nemec. I'm the Education Director of the VIA Institute on Character here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm very excited to be here today with our special guest speaker, Dr. Neal Mayerson. And before I introduce Neal to you, I wanted to just show you say a little bit about what you see on your screen here. These are a couple of new products that VIA is extremely excited about, a couple new products that have just come out. It's a VIA Pro Team Report is one of them. So this is a report based on people's VIA survey results and is used to help teams become more effective and engaged and have higher well-being and to connect better with one another. And the second product is our VIA Team Training, which actually starts this Monday. And actually, Neal is going to go into more detail on both of these in this session here. And that's partly one of the purposes for the timing here is we wanted to kind of allow people to kind of wet their palate a little bit to this work with teams. And many of the things that Neal will be talking about today will probably bring lots of aha moments to you and insights and generate new ideas and thinking around teams, and hopefully will make you excited about the VIA Team Workshop and use of the report with your clients and in your organizations. So with that in mind, I'm going to move on here to the next slide here. And so let me introduce Dr. Neal Mayerson. There are many wonderful things I could say about Neal and that are completely from my heart. And so let me say some of them. So one of them is the direct relationship here, which is that Neal is the founder of the VIA Institute on Character. So what could be better than to hear from the founder? So obviously a true pioneer in terms of the work here with character strengths. Neal is also the original collaborator with Marty Seligman back in 1999, 2000, when Marty was just conceptualizing this field of positive psychology and had named positive character as one of the key areas in positive psychology. That intrigued Neal, and he connected with Marty, and Neal can go a little bit more into the story, but essentially from their early collaborations and hosting several scientific meetings and work groups, then came about the VIA classification after several more years of scientific inquiry by Chris Peterson. And that's also where the VIA survey then emerged from, too. So more about Neal. He's also a thought leader. When I think of character and character strengths, I've been privileged to speak with and connect with many of the different leaders in positive psychology and actually many leaders in psychology and other professions. And I would say you're going to hear today from the #1 person in the world in terms of character and character strengths, in terms of thought leadership. So it's a great privilege to be able to be here today. Neal's been the one that's really pushed the science of character strengths forward and continues to do that year after year since the VIA Institute was established in 2000. More about Neal. He's a psychologist, so has spent many years working with clients and helping them to have better relationships, to find their authentic voice, to connect with who they are, to express themselves in a genuine, real way, and to help them deal with problems and to deal with their own suffering better. Another piece that's not as common for psychologists is that Neal is definitely a very savvy, intelligent businessman. He's actually created and maintained many different organizations, nonprofit and for-profit. So not in addition to many of you knowing that he's the chair of this and founder of this for-profit, the VIA Institute, this not-for-profit VIA Institute, but also many other organizations as well. He's a philanthropist that supported and maintains the VIA Institute and its mission to bring character strengths research and practice to the world. And he appropriately, because of this early work with character strengths, and as we know, character strengths is the backbone of positive psychology, because of this early work, many refer to him as one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, along with others like Mike Csikszentmihalyi and Chris Peterson and, of course, Marty Seligman and Ed Diener and some of the others. So I'm very excited that Neal is going to be talking to us about teamwork and about bringing character strengths into the business world and organizations. And one final piece is that if you have questions for Neal, please go ahead and email me, and I'll try to monitor those throughout the call here. So my email is ryan@viacharacter.org, ryan@viacharacter.org. And the way that we'll do this session is that we have some planned questions. We'll be basically organizing this session around an interview of Neal that actually also is the interview questions are tailored to some of the slides that we'll be showing you. Then we'll also integrate in spontaneous questions from me and spontaneous questions from you all if you email me. Okay? So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Neal Mayerson.
Thank you, Ryan. This is I'm looking forward to this because I always look forward to any time where I can talk about things that I'm passionate about, and certainly this topic of character strengths and what real difference they make in the world and what potential they have is really a passion that's been driving me for, as you said, for many years, at least going back to when Marty Seligman and I first hooked up. It was around 1999, and at that time Marty was starting to conceive, as many of the listeners probably know. Marty at the time was the president of the American Psychological Association, and he was writing about the idea of the need for a positive psychology to complement and supplement the work that had been done up until that point in psychology, focusing on human suffering. And so, and as a psychologist, I of course was reading various journals and publications where Marty was writing, and became very intrigued by the concept because it connected with what my experience had been as a psychotherapist, and which was largely that as a psychotherapist, I so many times found that though I was trained to identify dysfunction and pathology and deficits, I found that what rang most true when I was the thousands of hours or whatever it was, I was sitting in offices with people behind closed doors year after year after year, that I just didn't see the kind of pathology and deficits that that I was taught to see. I certainly had people coming in with their host of presenting problems and their ailments and things that were bothering them, so that certainly fit. But as I got to know them, which was really what I was trying to do in a expedient way to be able to be helpful to them, as I got to know them, well, what I started to see more often than not was people were full of strengths, and they were just very unaware of them. They had what we now refer to as strengths blindness, which is they had a variety of different strengths, and they just didn't see themselves that way. The world hadn't taught them to understand themselves that way, and it had instead taught them to see deficits. So, one kind of prototypical client stands out that I'll describe to kind of explicate this my experience. Numbers of times I would run across somebody who would come into the office, and for this example I'll say a woman who was in my office, and what was wrong was that she found herself in yet another unsatisfying relationship, in a string of unsatisfying relationships in which she ultimately ends up feeling not valued, and disregarded and not respected, and feels bad about herself and feels unloved. And she stays in those relationships. They ultimately end. She starts up another one with the hope that it won't be like that. It ends up being like that, and a pattern starts to develop. And so there she is in my office, again bemoaning the fact that she's in a bad relationship. And so she would start to tell me various things. If I'd ask her, well, how do you understand what's going on? Why does this occur? And she would tell me things like, I'm too passive. I don't assert myself. I don't communicate my needs well. I'm too cowardly. I'm too anxious. A variety of negative descriptors. And as I would listen to her, the things that I was seeing and that I would point out would be things like, it sure takes a lot of persistence to stay in a relationship that is so challenging day after day, but you stick with it, and you stick with it with the hope and optimism that it's going to get better. And it seems to me that you have a lot of hope and optimism, more than, let's say, I would have in a similar situation in which I would have bailed a lot earlier. And so I can start to see and therefore reflect to her the fact that she does in fact possess hope and optimism. She does in fact possess persistence. She does in fact possess courage, because many times she's in a situation that not only feels unsatisfying but also feels a bit unsafe. And so now,
if I could just jump in,
yeah.
I love that example. I mean, it's such an awesome way to kind of begin this, to help to show people where people can get so rooted into seeing themselves and looking at their problems in one particular way, and then this character strength work offers such a beautiful reframe. So I love that start of that, and also what I kind of am getting from what you said there was just how natural this character strength stuff was for you, just even before Marty came along, before positive psychology came along, which is great. Can I, if it's okay, if I can bring you to the your initial connection with Marty and the what you've called the glass burn meeting, and
Yeah.
some of the things that really struck you at that meeting, and your vision.
Yeah. So that was, I was telling that story just because my experience as a therapist and my experience in life just as a person, at the time that Marty started writing about a need for positive psychology, it was resonating with me. It resonated with what my personal experience was. And so Marty and I started to work together and towards helping to establish this new positive psychology. And Marty was conceiving of the study of character strengths as the backbone of this new positive psychology. And so we held a retreat at a place called Glass Burn in Pennsylvania, where Marty chose, and we invited a very diverse group of people from the positive youth development field, psychologists, people who had been instrumental in developing the DSM manual, people from biology who were experts in classifying things and developing and studying taxonomies. We brought people from the field of philosophy, and in fact many of you may know either know personally or know of James Pawelski, who now is the leader of IPA. And James was actually at that first meeting. For those of you who know James now, he back then he had a nice long ponytail and was a philosophy professor at the time, and he was brought in. And so we had a very diverse group of people together at this retreat for a couple of days to discuss this idea of how might we develop a classification. And I remember at the outset of that meeting, I got in front of the group and I told them why, what my vision was, at least, and why I thought this was the beginning of such a long and a very exciting and important journey at the time. And this was 12 or 13 years ago, I guess. And what appeared in my head, it was that through creating a science of character, we would be building a fulcrum around which humanity could then have the opportunity to tip towards its better nature. And to the extent that we built a good solid fulcrum that had a nice point, and hopefully everybody knows, the fulcrum basically is a pivot point. It looks like if you can imagine, like a triangle with a flat board across it, and it can tip one way or another. And so what we were, by developing this science of character strengths, we were going to create that fulcrum, and that would give humanity the opportunity to tip towards the positive. And
how would you say that vision is coming along so far?
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing. We have, so we did, we did our work. When I say we, I mainly mean, Marty and his colleagues put together a very elite group of scholars, and they did the work that was ultimately published in the Character Strengths and Virtues handbook, and which described the character survey and the classification. And before we knew it, we put the survey up online, and before we knew it, like 1 million people from all around the world had found it. We weren't marketing it. We weren't, doing the things you do to try to make people aware that something is there. They found it. And so at that point we knew that we had just kind of, whatever the work was that we had envisioned was going to be important, that the world was resonating with that and responding by finding their way to this survey and taking it. Now at this point in time, we're approaching 2 million surveys having been taken, and from over 240 countries. There have been dozens of scientific articles. We have very interesting research going on right as we speak. And so I'd say that it's and there are many, many, many stories that we've heard, and therefore I know there are multiples of that we haven't heard, of just personal transformation, people who, as a result of focusing on their character strengths, have transformed their lives. So I'd say we're off to a great start, but we are very much in our infancy, and this like any knowledge base and acquiring knowledge, I think of a long period of time over which we need to think in terms of acquiring new knowledge, and we'll acquire it through some combination of science and practice.
Yes, yeah. So much time and effort has been put into this, and also has just naturally emerged from the world, really, in response as well. But you yourself have put in a lot of time and effort and money into this topic, and so what kind of is driving that? I'm going to actually move on to the next slide too with that question.
Mm. Well, that's a great question. Certainly, it's a question at times I ask myself. But I feel pretty confident of how I answer that to myself. And it kind of goes back to my experience as a clinical psychologist, a psychotherapist, which is that what I have observed is that we all come into this world with some innate characteristics, physical characteristics, psychological characteristics, and then, as we all know, we interact with our environment, and that's the old nature-nurture debate. And by and large, with a broad brushstroke, psychological research is, when we look at the heritability and stuff of psychological characteristics, by and large, seems things come out to be about 50-50, where it seems like 50% of who we are seems to be rooted in our composition, kind of something in our constitution, and then another half of it seems to be shaped by our experiences in life and our environment. And so it seems to me that we come into this world and we start to unfold. So imagine a little potted plant, and imagine that a little seedling or a little stem is sticking out of that out of the ground in that pot. And at that point in time, you know that something is alive and something is growing, but without any more information, you don't know exactly what it will grow to be and what characteristics it will have and what characteristics are kind of innate to it. And your task, if you're the gardener at that point, your task is to provide it the basic nourishment, nutrients, and sunlight that it needs to grow and unfold, and you observe it as it unfolds. Well, so you imagine that, and what happens with us as human beings is we start to unfold, but the influential and the powerful adults that populate our world as infants and then children and then teenagers, etc., are people who are not simply disinterested sideline observers, and they just sit back and in wonderment just wait and see how we unfold. But instead they tend to have vested interest. They have their own ideas of who they want us to be. They have their own ideas of who we should be, and they start exerting their influence in many different ways. For some of us, we are lucky enough that the ideas that the influential people around us have of us, of who we should be, actually fits quite nice with who we actually are. And life unfolds pretty well for that group of people. For many others, and I feel like too many others, there is more of a disconnect. And what happens is when we're very young, we're very programmed to please the influential people around us, the adults that control our lives and control the resources and control our safety, etc. And so we aim to please, and we do our best. And to the extent that their requirements are for us to be substantially different than our nature would have us be, then we start to experience lots of problems. And that quiet voice inside of us that is us and guides us and helps us make good decisions about what we're going to do and who we're going to be with and who we're going to have relationships with and how we're going to conduct ourselves, etc. That internal voice gets quieter and retreats more and more into the background, and we learn to live life in accordance with meeting other people's expectations, and we lose track of ourselves. We disconnect from ourselves. And that, I felt like, in my experience as a psychotherapist, it made me very, very sad how many people I saw who I felt had undergone varying degrees of that experience. And on the other side of the coin, how rewarding it was to be part of the process in which I was able to help them become reintroduced to themselves and watch them embrace themselves and unfold themselves as adults when they had the full capacity to do that. And And so all this work on character strengths, I feel, is a pathway, a way of understanding in an important and central and essential way of understanding our psychological nature. Certainly, what's best about us in terms of being a human being and our psychological characteristics. And so the idea that we could study what's best, we could develop assessments to help people see that part of themselves and bring it into sharp focus, and to do that with some expediency and not simply have it be this kind of mushy, wandering around, soul-searching, I'm trying to find myself kind of thing, but kind of that it could become a more deliberate and pointed and efficient process. And that it seemed to me that that was a very, 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 and that it is very, very fundamental value that we can bring to people as they're growing and developing. And so it seems to me that work on character strengths is essentially about helping people know important parts of their essence and being able to use that knowledge to build their lives in ways that are congruent and consistent with who they are. And I think those lives end up being lives that feel good, and they feel full and fulfilling and satisfying, and that's an important pathway to well-being. So I think it's very central and fundamental work, and that's why I've been dedicating so much time and effort and energy to it.
That's excellent. Yeah, and such wonderful big picture ideas here, but at the same time that affect all of us as human beings. And let's maybe shift a little bit now into more into the topic of your presentation into the business world. And can you narrow the focus now a little bit to the application of character strength
Yeah.
to business, to teams, and what you think the most important kind of ideas are?
Yeah. Well, looking at the slide that you have up here, so kind of continuing from what I was just saying, human beings, it's important to us to understand ourselves and to express ourselves in our lives, to have our lives to represent expression of who we are. We are social animals in our core, and so it's very, very, very critical and important that other people, not everybody, but that there are other people in our lives that recognize who we are and value us for being who we are. And we all also seem to strive for or yearn to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And again, I kind of connect that to our social nature, our sense of that human beings aren't individuals. I mean, we've moved in the direction, and certainly in our short kind of lifespan, it's been a very individual focus on understanding human beings. But it hasn't always been that way. And in fact, when you look way back in human history, or even when you look at other animal species that are very social in nature, you see that the concept of the whole and the group is essential and fundamental, and that we're not simply a bunch of individuals, but we are in fact social and groups. So we want to feel, so we want to be able to express who we are. We want to be valued by others. We want to feel part of something bigger than ourselves. And
I'll move on to that. You can apply that to the work.
Yeah, and so, I became aware of, as I, got more and more into all of this, I became aware of kind of the extensive research that had been done on this topic of employee disengagement, and which basically there have been lots of different studies, but if you kind of try to find kind of a generality, you can kind of see that the research shows that about 25% of employees are pretty well engaged, and about 15% are very disengaged and kind of what they call actively disengaged, and a good chunk of 60%, 50, 60% or so are in some stage of not being engaged very well. And so that's kind of like remarkable to me. It's not surprising based on my observations, but it's kind of astounding to see it in numbers, and then to think of the implications of that for organizational performance. And so I kind of liked a study I saw by Soroto in 2005, and one reason I was attracted to it was because just the breadth and depth of the population that was studied. Nearly 1 million employees. I think it was 800,000 or 900,000 employees from 28 different multinational public companies. They studied public companies because the dependent variable they were studying there had to do with stock prices and earnings per share. And what they showed, and this is kind of consistent with other research from a variety of different quarters, is that when companies have high levels of employee engagement, their study showed 8 to 1, 8 engaged employees to every 1 disengaged employee, had over 2.5 times higher earnings per share in the public market than low engagement companies that were kind of defined as having 40% or so of their employees disengaged. It's of course makes common sense, and our common experience also is that we too many of us, and we know too many of our friends, colleagues, family members, etc., who their thing is, well, my job's a job. I go there to earn a paycheck, and there really isn't much level of engagement. They just go through the motions, and work is kind of a drudgery.
Why do you think that is? Why is there so much disengagement?
Well, I think there's two basic reasons. One is what I was describing before, is that when a person becomes very disconnected from themselves and from who they are, it then becomes very hard for them to navigate navigate into activities that are engaging for them. It almost becomes kind of random or happenstance. And so with that lack of self-understanding of who am I, and the lack of encouragement to try to find ways to express yourself and connect with what you're doing, people get disconnected from themselves, and they're actually not even consciously trying to find ways to be engaged. They accept disengagement as what life is. And secondly, I think it has to do a lot with the way organizations tend to put themselves together. So one of the areas that Marty defined early on in this field of positive psychology is positive institutions. And as most of the things Marty does, that was another kind of brilliant move on his part. My observation is that there are maybe a couple of fundamental mistakes that a lot of us make when we are organizing ourselves, or putting companies together, or putting teams together, when we're coming together as groups. The one error is that we forget that we're human beings, and so we treat we act as if we are machines. So it's a very mechanistic point of view of organizations. It's kind of like maybe an outgrowth of the Industrial Revolution or something. But we tend to think like, well, Neal has a certain job description. He's supposed to do the following tasks. We define those tasks to him. We try to ensure, either through hiring or training or something, that he's pretty good at, putting a widget together. And then we tell him to do it. We tell him when to show up and where to do it and how to do it, and do it until 5 o'clock and then be done. And we are treating the people as if they are machines. And I can tell you personally, as a person who has developed and managed numbers of organizations, that I have fallen prey myself, and many to this idea. And there have been many times that I have, half jokingly but too seriously, actually, said to myself, or maybe my, one of my chief executives or something, that saying something like, life would be so easy if we just didn't have people to deal with. If if we didn't have to have employees, boy, could we do great. Because human beings on one hand, and certainly, and I'll circle back to this, when I would have certain kinds of expectations, would just be maddening. And with the idea that, well, why can't people just, you set a goal, you tell them what to do, they line up in single file, and they do what they're supposed to do, and there's no complaints, and everything's done, and you put the product out the door, everything would be great. But it's not the way things happen. And so there's, on one hand, there are leaders of organizations who, at some level, they kind of dream and wish that, oh, wouldn't it be great if just, I didn't have to deal with people, everybody were machines. But really, all of us know that there's something wonderful about human beings, and human beings can accomplish and do things that, at least at this point in time, machines can't do, and we don't expect machines to do. So the idea is that when we have human organizations, it is a must. If we want to get the most out of the organizations, we have to attend to the humanity of the organization, to the human beings. What is it about human beings when they come together as a group? What do we know about that? What do human beings need? What are their natural inclinations? And then we need to organize accordingly. And so the old and the traditional kind of command and control model of many organizations, where it's very hierarchical, and you've got some people up top, and in this world they tend to be men, who are kind of defining, what are we doing and where we're going, and everybody else get in line, like I said, get in a single file line. Here's your job, and here's your job, and here's your job. Everybody do their job, and go home, and everybody will be happy. And if you step out of line, you get in trouble, and blah, 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 blah. That's kind of the old command and control. And with the idea that human beings only function in a very linear and rational way. But, as I became very interested, because over the years, as I started to observe that that's just not the way human beings are. It's partly the way we are, but it's missing a big part of the picture. I started to become interested in studying other social species, and what is happening when they are organizing themselves, but it looks very complex. It looks almost chaotic, like a swarm of birds, or a swarm of bees, or a swarm of ants, or a school of fish, or something like that. And a number of things. I learned a number of things as I was starting to look into that kind of stuff, and especially as I read a book by Peter Miller called The Smart Swarm, and he said, simply put, a smart swarm is a group of individuals who respond to one another and to their environment in ways that give them the power as a group to cope with uncertainty, complexity, and change. And that although, as you can see on this slide, this is probably a flock of starlings, and they're dispersed. It's not clear what order they're in. If you would watch the video of this, you would not be able to predict what the next direction it would move, because it seems kind of unpredictable and chaotic. But when scientists study these kinds of behaviors, there's an order that starts to emerge, and a couple interesting things that I have found for understanding teams and businesses and human organizations. And one is this idea of self-organizing. And so, you know, you can take, for example, when to understand this at one level, when people, let's say in the summer, crowd to on a hot day, and if somehow you were watching with a time-lapse photography from high above, what you'd see is that the space gets filled in basically with people following just a couple basic rules. They're trying to maximize their proximity to the water, and and sometimes for families with young kids, what they're trying to do is be close to the lifeguard station, and they're trying to minimize the proximity to their nearest neighbor. And just based on those two basic rules, there are no posted rules. Those aren't the written rules when you come to the beach of, you know, do this and do that. But people self-organize. And what you would see is, just based on two simple rules, that the beach will start to fill in, and it'll fill in until it's fully crowded. And people self-organize, and other animal species do too. They self-organize. And that evolution has built in an intelligence to how we self-organize. And so when we come together as human beings into a company or a team or any kind of grouping, organization to do something, we also tend to self-organize. And it's interesting to start to think about what some of these kind of basic rules of interacting around which we self-organize. And I know I've heard numbers of experts who study this issue of organizational performance, and try to understand high-performing organizations and what distinguishes them. And you know, when lots of times the advantage of going to hear somebody give a talk as opposed to reading their book is, what they have to do is they have to distill everything they know from the book. They have to distill it down into a very clean distillate. And when I've heard those kind of people talk, it usually, you know, it ends up being that they distill it down to that people need to have a chance to contribute. They have to feel like they are recognized for being valued and making a contribution, and they have to be treated with a basic level of respect that, you know, we could spend time defining, but I think all of us kind of know what basic what is involved with being treated respectfully. But what's interesting, I think would be interesting for people either on this call or you know, who might go back and be working in teams, to start thinking of trying to distill down and think, if you're in a high-performing team, what are the few very, very basic rules that we use? You know, like people who study like these starlings, when they flock together, they find that the starlings follow two or basically three rules. They find that the rule is follow the 6 or 7 birds that are right around you. Don't look out beyond that. Just look immediately at the 6 or 7 birds around you, and do what they're doing. Go and follow them. And that's one rule. Another rule is don't fly into other birds. And then a third rule is try to gravitate towards the center, because that's basically the safest place. So you can see in this slide where the density is in the center, and the birds on the periphery are at higher risk to predators and stuff like that. But this whole swarm, when you study the swarm, you can actually create simulated computer models, and you can create based on those basic rules, and the computer model will behave similar to the to this flock of birds. And so
do you relate these rules, Neal, to character strengths?
Well, yeah, I think where it relates to character strengths is that let me mention one other thing that I think was very interesting that came from looking at how self-organizing of social animals, and it's this idea of distributed knowledge. And I thought it was interesting when I learned that many of you may know that there was a very famous show on TV for many years called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It's a game show, and it asks lots of questions, and the more questions you answer, the more money you win. And it gives you some options for when you get stumped by a question for how to get some help. And one option for getting help is something called phone a friend. And what that is the contestant gets to, ahead of time, find the most erudite person they know, and to have that person on standby to answer a question as an expert. So the person who they know knows the most in the world. And so you can call them up. That's Ask a Friend. Another option is called Ask the Audience, in which case you're asking an audience of basically random people who were in Hollywood, and they come together because they want to see a TV show. And they've kept statistics over the years of that show, and they show that the expert, so to speak, or the phone a friend, comes up with the correct answer about 65% of the time. On the other hand, when they ask the random group of the audience, Ask the Audience comes up with the correct answer about 91% of the time. A big difference. And so you go, well, how could that be? I mean, and that's because there's this idea of distributed knowledge that in any group of people, and again, bringing this back to organizations, is that all the people in the organization, everybody has a piece of knowledge and a perspective, and nobody has it all. And therefore, when you set up organizations, you have to set up organizations in a way that bring in allow full participation and encourage input from all quarters, and that way you can tap into the wisdom of the group. And so you need to build processes that enable that to happen. And so once you start realizing that, once I started realizing that, I started to have less and less have expectations and therefore frustrations related to why doesn't everybody just stand in line and do what they're supposed to do, and instead an appreciation for the diversity of perspectives that people bring to bear. And part of that diversity is very much influenced by character strengths, because with character strengths we all have our own profile of who we are. It's unique to who we are. It's what makes character. Sometimes character is misunderstood as, it's commonly misunderstood as a set of characteristics, let's say, 3, 4, 5 characteristics that everybody's supposed to have. Well, if everybody has it to the same degree, then everybody's the same, and then nobody has character in the sense of character that that's what makes me unique from you. That gives me my character, and the definition of character really is what distinguishes me from you and you from another person, as opposed to what makes us all the same. And that's a critical way of understanding character strengths that VIA brings to the table, because VIA explicates a whole range, 24 different character strengths that all come together in a person with in a different profile. And so therefore, in any team, we all have a particular unique perspective that we can bring together. And it's important for us to allow some breathing room for all of those, for all of that input to occur, and trust the process, the self-organizing process. Trust the process that everything doesn't have to be linear, but that there's also a natural process that we have as human beings, and character strengths are part of the picture of our diversity, of that we need to make room, give breathing room to allow everyone to participate in that and not get bent out of shape when things aren't simply straight lines.
Now, what about strengths versus talents, and what's the distinction there?
Well, that's probably one of the most important things that I have learned, I'd say, as I've because generally in the field of positive psychology, people talk about strengths and they don't take too much care to distinguish one kind of strength from another. But at least from my experience and my observations, it seems actually critical to make distinctions between different kinds of strengths. And so, strengths of, and then the language also gets confusing. So sometimes the language between abilities and talents and skills, people mean different things when they say those different words. But just for the
so
sake,
what are some of the distinctions you make? Like, you can even give like sort of your definition.
Yeah, just for the sake of this conversation, I think of ability as kind of innate potential, and I think of and then through things like learning and practicing and stuff, we develop our abilities into talents or skills, and I kind of use talents and skills synonymously. I know others don't, but I do. I think of those as kind of developed abilities, and so and there's no question that talents and skills are definitely strengths in our lives. And in fact, I'd say a lot of us live in talent-centric worlds where everybody's kind of focusing on how much talent do we have and how much skill do we have, and thinking that that is the be-all and all. And but what I've learned is that it's not. So let me use just a personal example, and I think this is a pretty common example of being a young kid and having your parents put you in music lessons. So when I was a young kid, my parents put me in music lessons, learning to play piano, and I'm somebody who has some modicum of natural musical ability. So in terms of ability, I have some musical ability. And now my parents put me into music lessons, and I start to develop that ability into some talents and skills. And so there I am, I'm playing scales, and I'm learning, some classical music stuff, and basically feeling completely disconnected from myself. Nothing is kind of speaking to who I am. It doesn't touch me. I don't feel connected to it. I'm just developing a talent, and then I go the route of 99% of people all around the world who then decide they're quitting and they stop playing music, and whatever ability and talent they had then completely goes to waste because they put it to the wayside and they stop. Now, in my case, I was fortunate that when I became a young teenager, and I kind of became enamored with rock and roll bands, and at that time I was, there were lots of live bands playing, and I was seeing lots of live bands, and I just thought that was very cool, and it spoke to me. I started to feel like the music and the whole thing. So I started my own band, and then I started playing music. And because now it could kind of connect with who I was and connect with certain character strengths I had of, creativity and perseverance. I mean, that was back in the day when, to learn a song, I'd have to put the needle down on the vinyl and write down a few lyrics and pick it up and write down more lyrics and write down the chord, and it took a lot of perseverance, and perseverance is one of my top character strengths. I love working hard at things. And so I found a way to connect with who I was, and so it was when my ability could be developed into talent, and then when I could pair my talent with my character strengths, with who I was, that then I hit what sometimes we call our power zone. And so that's why, like on this slide, I say character strengths are the wings upon which our talents and skills soar, because we can get a lot done with raw talent, but we can't derive much satisfaction from simply doing things that we're good at but that don't speak to us. And for companies, the challenge for any company, it's kind of like losing weight. All of us can lose weight, but it's hard for any of us to keep that weight loss over time. And with companies, many companies can succeed in some period of time, but to be able to succeed over a long haul, which is the goal of most companies, to succeed over time requires more than just raw talent. It requires having an engaged workforce. And so that's really where character strengths come in, because character strengths is the point at which that helps you engage your talent and your skill, what you're doing, with who you are. And when you can put those two things together, what I'm good at and what I care to be good at, or what I care to do, that then things really begin to click. And then for employees, it becomes a way that the level of engagement increases, and you start to see employees who are coming to work a little earlier and staying a little later, and they're putting in what's called discretionary time. They're pumped up. They love their work because it's like a calling. And by calling, what I mean is that the work calls forth your strengths. And when your work calls forth your strengths, you love to do it. So there's not much more that you want to do, because going back to that slide, that and what I was saying before, we all want to be able to express who we are, and to and so one of the I've used a couple metaphors. One metaphor is to think of character strengths as kind of the connective tissue in a body. So if you think of kind of our muscles and our skeleton as kind of the hard assets of a company, kind of what resources we have, what finances, what our banking account looks like, what our vendor network looks like, etc. And we have our muscles, which are our people that have skills and talents. And sometimes I see the character strengths as the connective tissue. And so even though the connective tissue isn't the biggest mass of tissue in our body, it's critical, because as any athlete knows, you blow out an ACL or something and you're a great athlete, and all the talent that you have then is for naught, because you can't perform. And so I think, I use that as an analogy sometimes, as character strengths seem to be the connective tissue, what connects you to your work and what connects you to the people who you work with. Another analogy I use is sometimes the rocket ship analogy of like the Challenger, rocket. And so if you imagine you can see here on the slide that what you have on each side is where it says talents and resources. Those are the rockets that get you lifted off the pad and headed towards space. And so you can think of kind of the airship, the Challenger itself, as being the vehicle that you're trying to get into space that's going to fulfill your mission as a company. And you have all of your assets that are there. But as it turns out, everything you're seeing on the screen now is about 80% of what's needed to get into outer space. And in fact, there's another 20% of boost that is necessary to actually break into outer space and to fulfill your mission. And that extra boost comes from those rockets right at the bottom. And that's, by analogy, sometimes I like to think of those as the character strengths, so that when you infuse your work and the work environment with character strengths, where people are understanding what's best about themselves, how their work can be expressions of their best selves, how they can recognize what's best in each other and keep that alive in the environment and the culture, that provides the extra 20% boost to help a company go from almost, or from good, to being great and kind of optimizing their performance. So those are just a couple analogies that I think of in terms of what place do character strengths have in this work world, in teams.
Great metaphors. It's great to be able to have pictures to take away in the mind, to have pictures as we think about this work. One of the topics that's very intriguing, and one of the things that's been most exciting to me in this character strengths work is how the character strengths are universal, and we see this day in and day out at VIA when people send us videos or practices that they're using from various cultures around the world, or researchers around the world, people in various domains around the world doing this work, and it's just because this work speaks to everybody. And so I just wanted to see what you have to say about that. Any kind of comments you would like to make on that? Because it's kind of amazing, and I'm struck in awe when I think about the universality of this work and the potential for it to reach every person on the planet.
Yeah, I've also just been blown away by that. And just actually, it was yesterday I was looking at some video that was sent to us from a teacher in China who is using character strengths in teaching 6-year-olds. And I was blown away by how fluent those 6-year-olds were able to be with the character strengths. The teacher was even asked by a person who was interviewing her on this video, these are big words, these are big concepts in this VIA classification. The 6-year-olds really understand it, and she said, from the experience with this particular class and from other kids that she's worked with, she said they don't have a problem with it. They kind of intuitively understand it. Now, they may not be able to spell the word, and they showed me part of a video. In the video, they showed me a thing where a kid had written down that they were perseverant, and the spelling of perseverant was very you could tell the kid was trying really hard, but it was way off. So he couldn't spell it, but he knew what persevering was, and he knew it was him. And so, and I've personally watched teachers teach this, teacher teach this to a 4th grade class, and I've watched 4th graders teach it to 2nd graders, and then, as you said, we've watched people from all around the world, different cultures. And of course, Robert Biswas-Diener early on did studies of taking the classification and to the Maasai tribes and to the Inuit Indians and to the street beggars in Kathmandu and to Western people and Eastern people, and it is universal. And so I think the so the good news for us was that's what we set out to try to articulate. But the other important message, I think, for people who are working with character strengths is that you don't need to get too uptight about kind of like being an expert in character strengths, because it's something that's kind of natural. So when you're working with people, you're introducing it to clients, you're introducing it to work teams, you're introducing it to others and talking with them about it. You don't have to feel nervous or that, geez, I haven't really studied this a lot and, I'm not an expert in it. It's kind of like, not quite the same, but kind of like, running. It's kind of natural, if you want to, teach your kid to, to run. I mean, you really just have to give them the opportunity and the space, and they kind of know how to run, and you can show them how to run, but you don't have to be an expert in running and physiology and stuff. So I'd encourage the same thing has to do with the good news about the universality of character strengths is people take to them readily, they understand them readily, and so the issue is, the caveat is, remember that our concept of character strengths is not that it's kind of good or bad, and so you have good character, you have bad character, but that there are many ways, that there are at least these 24 fundamental ways that the classification points out that there are for us to be good and to be our better selves, and that we all are not the same. We all should not be striving to be the same. In fact, the beauty and the intelligence in nature has to do with our diversity. And so, when we're working with people, we can know that they will take to it readily, and they can find ways to apply it. In fact, there's what I feel like I've seen is that there tend to be people take it and run with it, and there tends to be both a general effect and a specific effect. So the general effect is people just take it, and there's something about just focusing on the fact that they have character strengths. There are good things about them. Not they don't have to fix it. It's not something that they have to fix, but they actually possess important strengths, and just that simple focus, it seems to have a general positive halo effect of causing people to stand a little more upright and puff their chest out and have a little more confidence. I was talking to a parent of a teacher who's a parent of a student whose teacher was using character strengths in the classroom, and that's the way she described it. She said, when I said, well, what good has it done for your child? And she said, I can't point to anything specific, but generally I would say he's just more confident in himself, and he's more confident in going to school and in himself as being a student, because he's in an environment in which people are looking for what's strong instead of what's wrong. And so so there's this kind of general effect that just the focus, people, I was surprised in the early years over and over again where people would say to me that taking the survey and getting the results had a really, really positive impact on them. And then I would say to them, oh, so tell me, what were your results? What are your top 5 strengths? And they really struggled to, maybe get beyond 1. And I thought, well, how does this make sense? How could something have a big impact on somebody and they can't even remember what their results were? It kind of like didn't make sense to me until I started realizing that there is this kind of general effect of just looking at just this idea of activating this consciousness in people that I am good. There's nothing that I don't have to always focus on what's wrong. I can leverage what's good about me, and that there are good things in other people that I can see if I just put a little effort into looking for them, that has a general effect of boosting people. And then there are a variety of specific effects, which we don't really have time to go into, but specific effects are things where people realize that they have particular strengths that they are not modulating properly, and so they're either overusing them, they're using humor at the wrong times and are off-putting the people, or they're underusing strengths, where they, let's say they're not using enough gratitude or whatever, and they start focusing on particular strengths and how they can use particular strengths to achieve things that they want to achieve, and those are kind of the specific effects. So you have general and specific effects. Again, I think that's important to recognize for people who are working with teams. That is, sometimes people they try too hard to find and to push for specific effects, that the specific, well, how do I apply my specific results? Well, and sometimes that gets very gnarly and they get tangled up in that. And I think, there's some comfort, at least I have found, in feeling like, what, even if that's not immediately apparent or it's not readily apparent, how do I apply knowledge of specific strengths to accomplish something in a concrete way, that I still know that as long as I maintain a consciousness and I help this team or this company or this group of people or these individuals maintain, that there will be this general benefit that comes from it, and that it will be, as Sonia Lyubomirsky has described, there will be this upward spiraling effect within the organization, this positive contagion that occurs as a result of everybody trying to understand what's best about themselves, creating a work environment in which you get to express what's best about yourself, and very, very importantly, and this is again something that tends to get lost, I think, a bit in positive psychology with the individual focus, which is really looking to others and seeing how can you recognize strengths in others and appreciate others for who they are at their core, and not get too self-focused.
It's a great reminder, and I like this also because it's just something really practical people can just kind of take with them and start to be thinking about when they're working with clients. Wait, I know we're running a little bit short on time, and so can we jump into a couple? These are a couple of images from the VIA team report, and can you maybe just say a little bit about these next?
Yeah, the VIA team report is, obviously we're really excited to be able to come out with this. People have been asking us for a long time. And again, this relates to this issue of an individual focus versus a group focus, and how is character strengths good for society, or at a smaller level, a company, or at an even smaller level yet, a team within a company. And that required us being able to aggregate the results from the individuals and present them in a way that can illuminate things for the group. And so one of the things that emerges from the new team report is this table, in which you can see that what we look at is the report looks at, it starts with what are the top strengths that people have, that the individuals have, and then it looks at what strengths are in common among the group. So like in this group, you can see 100% of the team members, and I'm pretty sure I know this, actually the team that this came from, and it's a 6-member team, and actually all 6 people have perspective in their top strengths. So 100% of the people have perspective, 80% have judgment, 60% have love, perseverance, or social intelligence. And so what the deal is that when in a team like this, 100% of people have perspective, the more that a group of people have strengths in common, that starts to influence the culture of that team. And so it influences what their tendencies will be of thinking and behaving and feeling. And so this team will have a tendency towards these strengths that they hold in common. There will be a lot of momentum. And so it's good for this team to understand where will our natural tendencies be, what will we gravitate towards, how do we leverage that, and from this view, are there any vulnerabilities that we have that we should be thinking about, areas that we don't hold, there's not a lot of momentum in our group for it. And so let's say on this group, in this group, like you don't see creativity at the top, and so the question to this group might have to be, how do we deal with generating new ideas? And it could be that they start to revert to curiosity. It could be that they start to look at secondary strengths that they all have. Lots of possibilities in the exploration, and that's really what the team report does. It presents data, and then it presents explanations of how a consultant or a team could start to explore the meaning of these data to get a better perspective on themselves, what their natural tendencies will be that otherwise without these data would be kind of subterranean. They wouldn't necessarily be conscious about it, and therefore they wouldn't be able to manage it very well. But with the data presented to you, you can be very conscious and deliberate about how you use those insights about yourself as a group. So one thing that, a big thing that emerges with the team report is a picture of cultural strengths, the strengths that the team holds in common, and we look at that from a number of perspectives. Here it's looked at from the perspective of individual strengths. We also look at it from the perspective of the 6 virtue classes. We look at it from the perspective of that dichotomy that many of you might be familiar with from our VIA Pro report, which is the heart, mind, and the self-other kind of perspective. And we've kind of relabeled the self-others into interpersonal and intrapersonal. Now, the other really, really cool thing that comes out of being able to look at people's top strengths in the context of other people, which is what you're able to do with a team report, is put your strengths in the context of other people. And that's all of a sudden where you get so much insight, and where character strength results really become three-dimensional and dynamic, because it starts to indicate, well, what use are the character strengths that I have? And so I just talked about the strengths that we have in common. What also becomes illuminated is those strengths that are unique to us, and that it is good for us to know about ourselves, and it's good for our team members to know about each other, so that we know when to call upon one another. I like to think of like a basketball team, and a basketball team, it's good to know who's our good dribbler and who's our good free throw shooter and who's our good rebounder, etc. Because in different situations, we all want to know, if we're in a situation where we need to run the clock out and we need to stall time, we need to know who's our best dribbler. And if we're in a situation in which we need to get a foul shot and to win a game, we need to know who's our best free throw shooter. And so the same thing holds with a team. So I was just talking with a team up in Wisconsin. It's a big healthcare company who's been using VIA character strengths. And the leader of that company is a very, very dynamic person whose top strengths are curiosity and zest and creativity. And so in their meetings, he's running all over the place with new ideas, new thoughts, new concepts. He's all over the place. And then what he realized after they were looking at their character strengths is that there were other people who had unique strengths of perspective and prudence. And so he realized that, and they realized that, you know what, before we end any of our meetings, we're going to end all meetings with one of the prudence or perspective people who have those as top strengths. Be the person who starts to put perspective on everything we've been talking about today, starts to pull it together, starts to articulate next steps. Because without that, so that's, without that, we all leave this meeting, and with the exception of the one person who likes to hear himself talk, everybody's wondering, well, geez, that seemed like a waste of time. What did we really accomplish? And they could wrap that together by taking the viewpoint of character strengths, looking at unique strengths, and seeing that, hey, why don't you step in with your perspective, so-and-so, because that is what we need at this point in time. That's why I call those unique strengths kind of strengths of leadership. If you think of one kind of leadership is what I call positional leadership. You're supposed to lead because that's your position, that's your title, that's your job. And then there's also conditional leadership or situational leadership, in which moment to moment in the dynamics of a team, it's your turn to step forward with your strengths. It's, if you're a creative person and it's a time in a meeting for some idea generation, you step in. If it's time for perspective, you step in. If it's time for critical thinking, another person steps in. And those moments of leadership, they might just last a few minutes, but they're critical because that sense of leadership, it's very dynamic. And in reality, we all need to step in and lead a process that is aligned with what our strengths are and who we are. And so this perspective of unique strengths is very empowering for a team to understand. It's something that, again, we highlight with the team report. And the team report offers it's a whole new set of data that teams can use to understand themselves. I'll throw one other thing out just because I like the idea. When I was talking to a compliance officer at a company once, and I noticed that her top character strength was love, and I said, quoting the old the Tina Turner song, "What's love got to do with it?" I said to her, what's love have to do with following rules and being a compliance officer? And she looked at me, and she wasn't stumped by it at all. She looked at me and she said, "I like to think of it as the way I bring my soul to my work." And I thought, wow, your soul to your work. I don't think of compliance as like soulful. It's about rules, and what are the rules and how do you follow the rules. It doesn't feel like very soulful work. And she said, it is for me because the rules are for a reason. It's to protect people, and I care about the people who I'm protecting a lot. I know the people I'm protecting, and I care about them a lot. And it's that love for who they are and wanting to care for them as to what causes me to be so engaged in my work as a compliance officer. And that really struck me as just a great example of how character strengths, once you bring it in to people's consciousness and ask them to start thinking about what's it got to do with the way you work, that they come up with realizations, and once they come up with that awareness, their work is transformed.
It's a beautiful example. I mean, that strikes me deeply as well. And I know that with this team report, that there's so much more that you're going to actually be going into in the course coming up on Monday in terms of other graphs and details. And so there's much more to say on that. And really, I just want to also kind of give it another plug that this has really been, many years that Neal's been working on this and kind of leading a team of many different people and actually getting feedback from different leaders in the business world around the world, actually, a number of different feedback. And so it's been a labor of love, and I think the product is just from my own self, as a non-business person myself, I would say it's an amazing, incredible product, and I think people are going to really like it. But we'll continue that on Monday, actually, for those of you in the course. But maybe to conclude this session, let's go to the final slide here, which is sort of lessons learned, and I'm just going to actually throw all of them on there in case anyone wants to sort of copy them down.
Okay.
But if you want to,
so this is kind of I'll go through this really quick. So this is kind of a summary of, at least when I step back and think of what have I learned over the years from looking at research and talking to people who are doing things and applying it myself, etc. That for the workforce, employee disengagement is a big issue, and thankfully there's through the application of character strengths, we believe that can make a difference in improving employee engagement. And in fact, if you go all the way back to Marty Seligman's early book, Authentic Happiness, and he described the pleasant life and the engaged life and the meaningful life. When he described the engaged and meaningful lives, the character strengths were the primary pathway towards engagement. And so I think the same thing has been playing out, particularly with employee engagement, not just life engagement, work engagement, I mean. Companies by nature are the perfect places. They have the key ingredients to improve engagement because there's a group of people there. It's a perfect place. Everybody has something to do, so they have a way to express who they are. There's a group of people there who form relationships over time, and so it's a perfect place to get your need for being understood and valued. And of course, it's at the workplace where you have some common purpose that is larger than you as the individual. So I think companies are a perfect place to, as David Cooper-Ryder says, to magnify and refract strengths. I think it's critical to understand what I talked about before, that human organizations, we should not expect them simply to be guided by linear and rational processes, but that to trust in the nature of evolution that has taught us how to self-organize and the principles behind that self-organization, that there's wisdom in that, and that's one in which you really want to respect the diversity of knowledge and the diversity of character strengths that people bring to the table. Fourth, it's really, really important to distinguish between strengths of talent and character, because they feed upon one another, and when they get hooked together it really becomes very synergistic. And if you just think of one or the other, you can't have a successful company that has a lot of has great character strengths and not much talent. And you can only run so far with a company that has great talent but the people aren't connected, their work isn't connecting with who they are. Your success will be short-lived. The language of character strengths is natural. People take to it, and I think that's important to know, so that kind of eases the burden on all of us who are practitioners and trying to spread the word that we don't, we don't have to have a PhD in this stuff to introduce it and to help people start down a pathway, a journey to strengthen their lives with their character strengths. It's important also to, again, to say that when character strengths are applied, there are both general and specific effects, and that both of those effects are very powerful and important. Again, really, very, very, very quickly, a teacher, a story about a classroom, and there was a student. The classroom was working on character strengths, and this one student was really resisting the idea of embracing any of the character strengths as his own, and he was kind of a problem student, and who was kind of an outcast at school, and the teacher was persistent, and she thought the kid was really funny, and some of his cohorts thought he was pretty funny, and so ultimately they convinced him that he had humor as a character strength and playfulness, and he should embrace that, which he did. And so at the end of the year, it was this year, at the end of the year, the parents put together a little thank you book for the teacher, and in it they wrote notes, and their kids wrote notes, and one of the things that the kids said, and then the teacher said when they read it, it brought tears to their eyes, is it said that she made me love school. And so you think, well, how did that happen? That's that general effect where you go, this kid just feeling like I'm in a place where people are really trying very hard to see what's right about me and what's great about me and what's strong about me, and to the extent of trying to overlook what's wrong about me. That in and of itself changed his whole attitude towards school and made him love school that otherwise he was very disenfranchised with. So that's how powerful that general effect can be. And then finally, with practical tips, what I've heard people talk about is keep it simple. When you introduce it in a team or in a company, try to find the low-hanging fruit, the people who are going to be most receptive. Don't go to the people who are going to be the, the most resistant. Try to go to the most receptive people and get started there. When you introduce this to a team or an organization, you have to establish a champion, somebody who's going to keep this front and center, because otherwise anything you do with it will be like anything else, that if you have a workshop on it, or you spend a day on it, or you spend a couple, and then it kind of falls by the wayside. You need a champion who's going to keep it front and center over time, because we have habits we have to break. And as we've learned in positive psychology, the human brain naturally kind of tends to hold negative events and problems are stickier, and we tend to hold on to and pay more attention to it. And so when we're trying to create an environment in which we focus on the positive and focus on strengths and character strengths, it takes actually deliberate effort, and we're actually having to break some natural and old habits. And so you have to have a champion. You have to have a champion. And then to keep it simple, sometimes, what I've seen people do is, instead of getting all complicated and I got 24 strengths, or I got 5 or 7 top strengths, just pick one strength, and for the next while work with the one strength. Just keep it simple. You don't have to, do everything all at once. So those are some of the practical tips I've heard from people who have been successful at implementing this in businesses and in organizations.
Well, they're great ones. Well, thank you very much, Neal. On behalf of everybody listening, I think it's fair to say that it's been a very stimulating and insight-generating session. We all appreciate it very much, and I know we didn't get to everybody's question, and so we'll make sure that we at least answer some of those individually, so the questions that weren't answered. And maybe it's appropriate for me to conclude with the quote from you, Neal, that was in one of the earlier slides, that you posed to Marty and the early group in the early kind of beginnings of positive psychology. And so now, kind of on behalf of you, I'll kind of restate this statement to all of us listening here. And you had said, the science of character will be the fulcrum on which humanity will tip towards its better nature. And may all of us be people that can help to facilitate that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I want to thank everybody who's, this is one of the early things I said to Marty way back at the beginning, and I've said it many times over my career, is recognizing that individuals don't accomplish great things, groups of people do. And so everybody who's becoming part of this effort, everybody who's doing their parts, it's unbelievably critical, and that nothing, greatness is not achieved by individuals. Greatness is achieved by the mass effort. And so, really deeply from my heart, I really appreciate everybody who's working at this and working on it, and because that's what it'll take to accomplish what you just said, Ryan.
Absolutely. Well, so to be continued then.